What if the very system that claimed to value professionalism, discipline, and leadership was quietly built to erase the people who embodied those qualities the most? This is the story of Maya Thompson, a brilliant black female engineer, a devoted single mother, and the woman no one saw coming. When she brought her autistic son to work one day due to a childcare emergency, she didn't just face judgment, she was publicly fired by her powerful boss, who thought she could make an example out of Maya. But what Cheryl Whitman didn't realize was that she had just awakened the architect of her own downfall. What followed wasn't an outburst. It was a masterclass in quiet resistance. Maya didn't scream, she didn't beg. She built a digital trail, a silent coalition, and a truth so undeniable that it shook an entire industry to its core. If you've ever been silenced, overlooked, or told you were too much for daring to exist fully, this story will hit home. Because sometimes the most powerful structure isn't made of steel. It's made of one woman who refuses to disappear. Welcome to the blueprint of her rise. The moment she walked out the door was only the beginning dot. It was supposed to be a simple Thursday, just one more early morning at Wexler Engineering Group. The kind of day where Maya Thompson would quietly arrive 15 minutes before anyone else, refill the communal coffee pot, and double-check every bolt, beam, and boundary load of the bridge simulation she'd been perfecting for 3 months. But on this particular morning, the air wasn't crisp with precision. It was strained, weighted. A storm was already brewing in her chest, not with nerves, but with worry. Her 7-year-old son, Caleb, sat beside her in the back seat of her 2008 Honda Civic, clutching his noise-canceling headphones like a lifeline. His dark brown eyes stared blankly out the window as Maya pulled into the staff parking garage. A faint hum escaped his lips, a familiar sign. He was retreating. Again. That usually happened when his routine was disrupted, and today had been anything but routine. Their babysitter had canceled at 5:23 a.m., sending a short, emotionless text. Emergency. Can't come. Sorry. Maya stared at that message for 2 full minutes, trying to will it into changing, into softening. But it didn't. So she did what she always did. Adjusted, adapted, persisted. She'd packed Caleb's iPad, his drawing notebook, 2 rice crackers, and a water bottle. She gave him his supplements, checked his sensory kit 3 times, and told herself she could manage a 3-hour window without anyone noticing. And for the first hour, everything went according to plan. Caleb sat in a quiet corner of the mezzanine floor in the structural testing lab, headphones on, scribbling swirling constellations and cityscapes in his notebook. Maya ran diagnostics on the bridge model, prepped the sensor arrays, and finalized the presentation slides for the Department of Transportation visit at 11 a.m. She moved through the lab like a whisper, measured, practiced, invisible, until the elevator doors opened. Click, click, click. The sound of Cheryl Whitman's stiletto heels on polished concrete echoed like a war drum through the lab. The director of technical operations, flawlessly coiffed, surgically assertive, entered like she was storming a boardroom battlefield. A gaggle of junior engineers trailed her, necks craned, eyes wide. Maya didn't turn, not yet. "Excuse me," Cheryl's voice cracked like frost. "What is that?" Maya's fingers froze on the laptop trackpad. She exhaled through her nose, straightened her spine, and turned slowly to face her boss. Cheryl stood at the edge of the platform, gaze locked not on Maya, but on Caleb, who had just looked up from his sketchbook. "That," Maya said calmly, "is my son. His name is Caleb." Cheryl blinked once, then smiled with all the warmth of an open freezer. "This is an engineering lab, Maya, not a daycare." Several heads swiveled, including 2 interns who had no idea what was about to unfold. Caleb flinched slightly under Cheryl's icy stare and curled inward, pulling the hood of his sweatshirt over his head. Maya took a half step forward, placing herself between him and the fire that was building. "I'm aware," Maya said carefully. "The babysitter canceled this morning. Caleb has special needs. I brought him with me because I couldn't afford to miss today's structural demo." Cheryl's arms folded. "That's not my concern. We have protocols for a reason." Maya could feel her heart pounding, not with fear, but with the cold clarity of déjà vu. She'd seen this performance before. Different stage, same actress. A woman with inherited power using professionalism as a blade. A woman who had never once worked late or missed her son's soccer match. A woman who called herself a mentor, but only to those who looked like her. I can move him upstairs to the admin lounge. No, Cheryl interrupted sharply. You'll move him out of the building, now. Maya stared at her. You can't be serious. I am. Cheryl glanced at the others in the room, as if expecting applause. Wexler Engineering holds itself to the highest standards. You know that. Effective immediately, you're suspended pending review. Security will escort you and your situation off the premises. A stunned silence settled like dust. Maya didn't speak. She didn't beg. She simply knelt down beside Caleb, lifted his trembling fingers into hers, and whispered, It's okay. We're leaving, sweetheart. But as she rose, her eyes met Cheryl's, and something inside her shifted. Something cold, ancient, and patient. She noticed Cheryl's phone, screen open, recording. Of course, a lesson in corporate discipline. A public execution for her brand. Maya's voice rang out softly but clearly. Some people think authority means cruelty, but real strength, real leadership, that means knowing the difference. She walked toward the elevator with Caleb in her arms, head high, like a soldier retreating only to regroup. Her departure wasn't silent. It was seismic. A technician looked away. A young female engineer dabbed her eyes. No one spoke, but Maya heard every word in their silence. As the elevator doors closed, she felt Caleb's small hand squeeze her shoulder. Mommy, he whispered, did I ruin everything? No, baby, she said, voice firm, almost smiling. You reminded me what really matters. And just like that, the woman they thought they had humiliated walked away carrying far more than a child. She carried knowledge, she carried memory, and now she carried purpose. They hadn't ended her career. They had triggered something they were wholly unprepared for. The silence that followed her exit would be remembered for years. And the war they had just started, it wouldn't be fought with tantrums or tears. It would be won with data, with strategy, and with terrifying grace. The elevator ride down from the mezzanine floor was short, but to Maya, it felt like a descent through every insult she had quietly endured over the past 8 years. Every interrupted sentence in a meeting, every stolen credit for her ideas, every "you're so articulate" masked as a compliment. Every time her designs had to be peer-reviewed 3 times, while others sailed through on the wings of handshakes and last names. Caleb leaned his head against her shoulder, silent, his breath warm on her collarbone, while Maya stared straight ahead, her mind already mapping out blueprints. Not for bridges this time, but for retribution, precise and unshakable. By the time she reached the parking lot, her phone was already buzzing. A colleague had texted her a screenshot of Cheryl's tweet, her suspension filmed and shared online with the caption, "Accountability in action, keeping standards high at Wexler." Below it were hashtags like #LeadershipMatters and #professionalism over personal life, followed by dozens of comments from strangers praising the strength of a woman who had just humiliated a mother for daring to have a sick child. Maya didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She buckled Caleb in, drove home in silence, and when she entered their small second-floor apartment tucked behind a grocery store on Chicago's South Side, she opened her laptop and created a new folder on her desktop named simply W Project. Inside it, she saved that tweet, then searched Cheryl Whitman on LinkedIn, downloaded her public resume, then clicked through to Instagram, where Cheryl had been foolishly open about her personal life. Lavish vacations, champagne brunches with captions mocking people who use their kids as excuses, and a selfie in front of a Wexler-branded PowerPoint titled "Managing Female Fatigue in Male-Dominated Spaces." Maya's fingers flew across the keyboard, not with vengeance, but with purpose. She remembered something her mother once told her during Maya's first year as an engineer. The more powerful they think they are, the more blind spots they leave behind. That night, as Caleb drifted off to sleep clutching his stuffed dinosaur under a pile of blankets, Maya sat at the kitchen table with a pot of weak coffee and opened a private browser tab. She logged into a secure server Terrence Gray had once shown her, a place for whistleblowers buried in the digital underground, and sent him an encrypted message. "Need a favor. It's time." While she waited, she kept digging. In the Wexler press archives, she found 15 articles boasting about their low employee turnover, only 3% annually. But Maya had a memory like an architect's blueprint. Precise, unforgiving. She remembered the names of every woman who had quietly disappeared from the org chart after maternity leave, family illness, or even speaking up in meetings. She compiled them into a spreadsheet, cross-referenced exit dates, and noted how most had been replaced not with promotions, but with strategic reallocation or contractors with stronger cultural fit. Around 2:18 a.m., her inbox pinged. Terrence had replied, "Whatever she did, I'm in. I owe you. What do you need?" Maya didn't hesitate. Access to internal Slack logs, exit interview summaries, and anything from Cheryl's private cloud you can legally obtain. At 2:37 a.m., he sent back one sentence. "Check your drive in the morning." She closed her eyes for 5 minutes. Just 5. And when she opened them again, sunlight was leaking through the blinds like truth demanding to be seen. She made Caleb breakfast, kissed his forehead, and gave him his therapy tablet, then returned to the laptop like it was a war table. The folder from Terrence was full of gold. Slack messages where Cheryl called an intern too emotionally fragile, jokes about maternity leave being extended PTO, and, most chillingly, a private Google Doc labeled Risk Profiles, listing employees deemed liabilities due to single parenthood, emotional behavior, or minority stress factors. Maya read each line with the stillness of a sniper. She didn't rage. She annotated, categorized, archived. She remembered how Cheryl had once told her, "Engineering is all about managing load-bearing stress." Maya smiled bitterly. So is justice. By noon, she had a heat map of firing patterns by gender and race. By 3 p.m., she'd matched it with social media posts that painted Cheryl as a progressive thought leader in diversity. By 5, she'd written the outline of an op-ed titled "The Cost of Pretending to Empower," but she wouldn't publish it. Not yet. Not until every piece fit. Not until it wasn't just personal pain, but irrefutable systemic exposure. That night, as Maya tucked Caleb into bed, he asked quietly, "Mommy, are we going to be okay?" She looked at him, his big curious eyes, his untamed curls, and said, "We're going to be more than okay, baby. We're going to change the rules." As she closed his door, she whispered to herself, "You built your power on invisible pain, Cheryl, but you forgot one thing. I don't break. I design." And in that quiet apartment filled with secondhand furniture and the weight of all the moments she'd been dismissed, Maya opened a blank slide deck titled Case Study, Structural Failure of a Corporate Culture. This time, the design wouldn't be for steel or concrete. It would be for collapse, strategic, surgical, inevitable dot. The next morning, while the city buzzed with the rhythm of office elevators and espresso machines, Maya sat cross-legged on the floor of her apartment, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her laptop propped on a shoebox like a makeshift war console. The early light filtered through the blinds in quiet stripes, casting shadows over scattered papers, printed Slack messages, and the ever-growing web of names, dates, and corporate hypocrisies. The silence was thick, yet under it hummed something low and dangerous, the sound of a woman thinking. Her inbox pinged. It was a reply from someone she hadn't spoken to in over a year. Lena Brooks, former mechanical systems designer at Wexler, now off-grid after a suspicious voluntary resignation post. The message was short. "I heard what they did to you. I have screenshots. Call me." Maya didn't hesitate. Within 15 minutes, she was on a Zoom call with Lena, who looked like a shadow of the ambitious engineer she once was. Her curls tied back hastily, dark circles under her eyes, a toddler occasionally tugging at her hoodie sleeve. "They said I couldn't handle stress," Lena said, her voice low and steady, "because I asked for time off when my mother had a stroke. They sabotaged my presentation, Maya, changed my numbers, made it look like I messed up the pipeline specs. I've kept every email." Maya didn't blink. "Send everything. And Lena, you're not alone anymore." That night, the folder titled W Project was renamed Silent Circuit, and it grew rapidly. Terrence created a secure portal, encrypted, anonymous, untraceable. Within 48 hours, 4 more former Wexler women uploaded documentation, exit evaluations, whispered warnings from HR, even audio recordings of Cheryl saying things like, "She's too emotionally volatile to lead a team," or "Her accent makes her less client-friendly." Maya sifted through the files like an archivist of injustice. She found patterns, chilling, deliberate patterns. Women of color removed during team restructuring. Mothers told they weren't focused enough. Employees with disabilities quietly nudged toward external opportunities. And in every case, Cheryl's fingerprints were on the exit papers. Maya didn't need revenge. She needed reckoning. she began compiling a dossier not just of Cheryl, but of the culture she had nurtured. A machine disguised as meritocracy, fueled by silent fear and selective removal. One night, after Caleb had gone to sleep and the apartment was dim except for the glow of her screen, Maya received an unexpected notification. A shared file from someone named Redwire, a pseudonym. Inside was a folder titled Internal Marketing Campaigns. Within it, Maya found a draft of an unreleased Wexler article, The Women Behind the Bridges, How Wexler Empowers Diverse Voices in Engineering. Her face was there. So was Lena's. Photos from old PR shoots, manipulated quotes, cheerful captions. Maya stared at the smiling version of herself, a woman who had once believed that hard work was enough, that visibility was progress. But now she understood. They hadn't wanted her voice. They wanted her silhouette, her optics. A trophy on a corporate brochure. Rage flickered through her, quiet and precise, like a laser. Cheryl hadn't just erased them. She'd sold the illusion that they'd been uplifted. Maya took a screenshot, titled it The Museum of Manufactured Empowerment, and filed it in the master folder. Then, she wrote an email, not to the press, not yet, but to someone more dangerous, Ava Pearson, the senator's daughter, the woman Cheryl had just tried to humiliate, publicly. Maya's subject line read, "You're not the only one, I have the proof." The reply came less than an hour later. "Meet me, we're going to bring her down." It was short, sharp, and it echoed in Maya's chest like the first note of a battle hymn. The silent circuit was no longer a group chat, it was an operation, and it was only just beginning, because in the shadows of Cheryl's curated empire, the women she'd underestimated were building something far more dangerous than a complaint. They were building consensus. And consensus, Maya knew, is the most silent weapon of all. Until it explodes, Ava Pearson wasn't what Maya expected. When they finally met in person, 2 days after that terse but promising email exchange, it was in the back of an independent bookstore in Lincoln Park, tucked between shelves of feminist literature and weathered engineering manuals. Ava walked in briskly, dressed in a sharp navy coat that didn't quite hide the weight of public scrutiny. Her eyes were fierce, her voice low and deliberate. "I don't want a settlement," she said before even sitting down. "I want to set fire to the whole damn narrative." Maya nodded slowly, sliding a flash drive across the table like a detonator. "Everything I have is on here. Exit patterns, internal messages, financial irregularities, a complete profile on Cheryl Whitman and the ecosystem she built." Ava inserted it into her tablet without hesitation, scrolling through folders, her brows furrowed. She doctored performance reviews, cross-referenced ethnicity with perceived leadership traits. Maya leaned forward. "That's not even the worst of it. Check the audio clips." Ava pressed play. Cheryl's voice crackled through the speaker. "I don't care how smart she is. She's too emotional. Clients don't want to see that." Then another. "These women think motherhood is a shield. It's a liability." Ava closed the tablet and looked up, her voice steely. "This is systemic discrimination, masquerading as corporate discipline. If we time it right, we can take it to a national platform." Maya exhaled. "Time it with what?" Ava's smile was razor sharp. "My father's campaign. He's running on family values and workplace equity. You're not just exposing Cheryl, you're proving why legislation is necessary." Maya's heart pounded. Not from fear, but from clarity. This wasn't personal anymore. It never really had been. It was infrastructure, the unseen scaffolding holding up a system built to crush women like her. That night, back in her apartment, Maya looked at the board she had taped to the wall. It was filled with printouts connected by strings of red yarn, like a detective's murder map. In a way, it was. Careers murdered, reputations buried, families pushed to the brink, all under the banner of high standards. Caleb sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, drawing with his markers. He held one sketch up to her. A woman in a cape, standing tall on a blueprint instead of a rooftop. "Is that you?" he asked. Maya blinked back the sting in her eyes. "No, baby, that's all of us." Over the next few days, the plan took shape. Ava used her connections in the political media circuit to line up interviews with 3 major platforms, 2 national podcasts, and a Sunday evening segment on public radio. Meanwhile, Terrence worked in the digital shadows, setting up a microsite with all the evidence, coded, authenticated, time-stamped. Lena coordinated former employees to provide testimony under alias or sealed identity. Maya compiled a pre-briefing packet and sent it to every HR executive, diversity officer, and female STEM leader she had ever connected with. But it wasn't until Ava called on a stormy Thursday afternoon that Maya knew the point of no return had arrived. "She's doing it again," Ava said, her voice tight with fury. "Cheryl just fired another employee, a Latina engineer, 5 years in. Reason given? Cultural misalignment." Maya didn't flinch. "Did she post it?" Ava hesitated. "Yes, a LinkedIn post just went up. Same hashtags, same smug tone." Maya opened her laptop. There it was. A photo of a young woman's ID badge placed beside a Wexler mug. The caption read, "Sometimes leadership means making hard choices. We wish her the best." Maya screenshot it, saved it to the archive. Then she hit send on the press email she drafted 3 nights ago. The subject line was simple: "The myth of meritocracy at Wexler Engineering, a data-driven breakdown." Within an hour, it was in the inbox of every major outlet on the East Coast. By midnight, the podcast Truth Under Steel aired its exclusive, a 40-minute episode titled Blueprint of Bias, featuring anonymized interviews, audio evidence, and expert analysis. The website went live shortly after. It was clean, clinical, undeniable. On the homepage, "This is not one woman's story. It's an institutional pattern." The ripple effect was immediate. Engineers across the country shared the link. Former Wexler interns wrote threads. Journalists requested interviews. Within 24 hours, the CEO of Technova Solutions issued a public statement. "We will be reviewing all former collaborations with Wexler Engineering Group." But Maya didn't watch the coverage. She was in a small, windowless room downtown, sitting across from a labor attorney with Ava at her side. They weren't there to file a lawsuit. They were there to deliver documentation of a criminal pattern: fraud, retaliation, privacy violations. The attorney flipped through the binder, shaking her head. "This isn't just a scandal," she whispered. "This is a case study in corporate rot." When Maya stepped outside, the wind hit her face like cold truth. She tilted her head up toward the gray sky and let herself breathe. Not in relief, but in readiness. Because now, Cheryl knew, Wexler knew, the world knew, and Maya was just getting started. Because behind every powerful structure, there's a silent engineer. And this time, the blueprint was built not to hold weight, but to bring the entire thing crashing down. The morning after the story dropped, Wexler Engineering Group's headquarters looked no different from the outside. Steel and glass reflecting the Chicago skyline like any other ambitious tower in the Loop. But inside, the walls were shifting. Emails flew like startled birds. Phones rang and rang. Executives whispered behind half-closed doors. HR sent out an all-staff memo titled Commitment to Transparency and Diversity, but no one read past the subject line. Cheryl Whitman walked into her corner office precisely at 7:46 a.m. As always, clutching her oat milk latte like a prop in her polished routine, but for the first time in her career, the silence did not comfort her. It warned her. She saw the article before anyone dared mention it. The headline sat like a curse across her desktop. The Blueprint of Bias: How One Company Engineered a Culture of Erasure. Beneath it, the evidence lay bare. Charts of demographic terminations, direct quotes from her Slack messages, screenshots of her LinkedIn brags repurposed as receipts of cruelty. And then came the audio. Her voice, clipped and confident, played on national radio. She's not management material, too maternal, too unpredictable. Cheryl's hand hovered over her mouse. For the first time, she didn't know what to click. What to control? She dialed the CEO. Straight to voicemail, she buzzed her assistant. No response. The article had detonated quietly, but it was seismic in its impact. Internally, Maya's dossier was spreading like wildfire. Copied, downloaded, whispered about in group chats and late-night Slack threads. Engineers who'd once looked up to Cheryl now forwarded documents to each other with silent shock. People were no longer scared to see what had always been there. They were furious they hadn't seen it sooner. Maya watched it all from a distance. She didn't refresh the page. She didn't need to. Her phone buzzed nonstop, but she only replied to 2 messages that morning. The first was from Lena, who wrote, "I just got calls from 2 firms that blacklisted me last year. They're suddenly open to a conversation." The second was from Terrence, who simply said, "We broke the algorithm." And maybe they had. Because Wexler wasn't just a company, it was a model. One that had been mimicked, quoted, and admired in engineering circles across the country. And now it was crumbling. Shareholders demanded emergency meetings. The city council announced a probe into companies receiving public infrastructure contracts. Former interns began uploading anonymous stories to a shared Medium page called Wexposed. Cheryl, for all her planning and posturing, had forgotten the one law Maya had built her entire life around. Every structure has a stress point, and hers was arrogance. That afternoon, Maya received an invitation, not from a journalist or a lawyer, but from the Department of Labor. They wanted her to testify in a private roundtable discussion about systemic discrimination in STEM fields. It was scheduled in 3 weeks in D.C. She stared at the email for a long moment, then turned to Caleb, who was quietly arranging his markers by color. He looked up at her and smiled, shy, small, but whole. Maya pressed her palm gently against the top of his curls. "You okay, buddy?" He nodded, then pointed at a drawing. It was the same superhero again, the woman in the blueprint cape, but this time, behind her were 5 other figures, all holding hands. "They're helping now," he said. Maya felt her throat tighten. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, they are." That night, Cheryl sat in a conference room with the board. 15 executives, none of whom would meet her eye. She tried to talk about optics, about spin, about how this was a coordinated smear campaign. But the chairman leaned forward, slid a printout across the table, and said, "Is this your voice on this recording?" Cheryl said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Outside that room, hundreds of employees refreshed their emails, their feeds, their hearts pounding. They didn't want blood. They wanted acknowledgement. A crack in the mask. A break in the cycle. But the email never came. Cheryl didn't resign. Not that day. She still thought she could ride it out. But Maya knew better. Some empires fall not with explosions, but with the slow, humiliating sound of support beams snapping one by one, too quiet for the throne to notice, until the whole damn palace collapses under the weight of its denial. And now, Maya wasn't angry anymore. She was patient, calculated. She didn't need Cheryl to fall. She only needed the world to stop mistaking her tower for strength. Because when that illusion shattered, there'd be space to rebuild, brick by brick, voice by voice. And this time, the foundation would belong to everyone. 3 days later, Wexler Engineering's executive floors no longer smelled of cedarwood diffusers and synthetic calm. They reeked of fear, thinly masked as procedure. The glass-walled offices, once symbols of corporate elegance, now felt like cages exposed under floodlights. Cheryl Whitman still showed up, hair impeccable, lips lined with a cruelty that no longer impressed anyone. But her power had changed texture. It no longer hummed through the floor like electricity. It sat brittle in her posture, hollow in her carefully worded memos. She sent out a company-wide email titled Reaffirming Wexler Values, a 946-word testament to denial. Words like misinterpretation, anonymous malice, and regrettable miscommunication were carefully arranged to form a shield, one Maya had seen 100 times before. But this time, it didn't work. Employees didn't reply. They forwarded the email to each other with silent disgust. One senior engineer, Asian American, 15 years with the company, left a sticky note on his office door that simply said, "Gone to find dignity elsewhere." Maya heard about it not from the news, but from Lena, who texted a picture of the note with the caption, "It's beginning." And it was. Quietly, a movement was forming. Former Wexler employees, men and women of every background, began connecting through the silent circuit portal, uploading stories, documents, even photos of team events where entire departments lacked a single Black or Latina woman. One file included exit survey data someone had smuggled out before being fired. Maya read the percentages with cold clarity. 74% of women of color cited hostile work culture as a primary reason for departure. 61% of single parents cited lack of flexibility. 0% had filed formal complaints. The silence wasn't accidental, it had been engineered. That night, Maya updated the W project folder with a new subdirectory, Systemic Failure Metrics. She labeled it like a scientist, like a strategist, but each click was a scar being counted. She stayed up late again, her eyes dry, her thoughts sharp. Across the city, Ava Pearson sat in a campaign war room, preparing a new press release titled The Cost of Professional Silence. She called Maya around midnight. "They're finally listening," Ava said. I've got 4 networks lined up, but I need you to go on camera. Maya paused. No edits? None. Full truth. Caleb stirred in the next room. Maya looked toward his silhouette under the blanket fort he had built with chairs and pillows. A fort. His refuge from noise, from confusion, from this world that often punished gentleness. She nodded, as if Ava could see her. Okay, she whispered. Let's do it. The interview was recorded in a small studio downtown. No makeup, no retakes. Just Maya in a navy blazer, the same one she'd worn to present the bridge model that was later passed off by someone else. She spoke plainly, not emotionally, but her voice carried weight that cracked through the polished silence of corporate media. It's not about one bad boss, she said. It's about a blueprint that's been copied across industries. One that tells women like me that we can be brilliant but not visible, dedicated but not human. And when we break, we're framed as unprofessional instead of overburdened. The segment aired 2 nights later. Social media exploded. #blueprint of bias trended across LinkedIn and Twitter. Young engineers tagged Maya in posts that read, "Now I know it wasn't just me." Anonymous tip lines at 3 other companies received spikes in reports. A prominent engineering university paused its partnership with Wexler. And Cheryl? Cheryl went silent. Not because she chose to, but because her words no longer carried voltage. Each statement from her office was met with laughter, then contempt, then nothing at all. Her empire had lost its audience. Meanwhile, Maya received an email from an unfamiliar address, a hiring executive at Helix Tech Solutions. It read, "We admire your clarity. We'd like to talk about leading our ethics reform division. Title, Executive Director of Inclusive Innovation." Maya closed the laptop slowly. Her hands trembled, not from rage, but from the overwhelming, unexpected weight of being seen. Really seen. She stood by the window of her apartment, watching the city lights flicker, and whispered to herself, "So this is what rebuilding looks like. Not vengeance, not victory parades, but silent resignations. Public apologies. Private reckonings. And somewhere, deep in the heart of a system designed to erase her, a new design was being drawn. One with her signature at the bottom, and this time, the structure would be built to hold it, began with a calendar update, a seemingly mundane notification sent out from Wexler's HR department. All staff mandatory meeting, Friday, 9 a.m., main auditorium. No explanation, no agenda, but everyone knew. The quiet had dragged on too long, and Cheryl's silence had ripened into something that no press release or pivoted hashtag could fix. The board had gone underground. Radio silent, no memos, no interviews. Rumors swirled. Executives were resigning in clusters, not all at once, but like dominoes falling out of order. First, the VP of Operations quietly retired to spend time with family. Then the head of diversity and culture deleted her social media and declined all external speaking engagements. A supplier pulled out. 2 architecture firms froze collaborations. And Wexler's biggest client, Interstate Steel, announced a full audit of every project tied to the company since 2017. For Cheryl, it wasn't a collapse, not yet. It was something worse, a loss of control, a slow, meticulous evaporation of relevance. And nothing terrified her more than irrelevance. But still she walked into the main auditorium that Friday morning, wearing her signature ivory blazer, heels echoing like a warning shot on the polished floor. Her assistant, pale and tight-lipped, handed her a printed agenda, but it wasn't hers. It had been drafted by legal. As she stood at the podium in front of 300 employees, Cheryl reached for the microphone like a CEO, holding on to the last fibers of a title that no longer fit. She cleared her throat. Wexler has always stood for excellence. But the room didn't hear her anymore. They saw the woman who mocked mothers behind closed doors, who weaponized empathy into liability, who turned human beings into risk profiles and called it leadership. Maya didn't attend. She watched the live stream with Caleb asleep on her lap and a legal advisor sitting across the kitchen table. The feed was glitchy, but clear enough to catch the crack in Cheryl's voice when she said the word misunderstanding. That word. That coward's shield. Maya shook her head. The word wasn't big enough to contain the pain of 15 women who'd lost their health coverage mid-pregnancy. Wasn't big enough to explain the $120,000 siphoned from the employee training fund to fund a trip to Florence. Wasn't big enough to justify the erased careers, the suppressed promotions, the retaliation campaigns hidden in Slack threads and Excel sheets. But Cheryl still believed in it, still clung to the illusion that this storm could be weathered with corporate doublespeak and vague regret. Then came the moment no one expected. A young black engineer in the third row, Renee, 2 years with the company, stood up. Not loud, not angry, just clear. Did Maya Thompson's child deserve to be punished because the babysitter got sick? A beat of silence, a shift in the air. Cheryl's eyes darted, her lips parted, but no sound came. Renee didn't sit. And do you regret what you said on those recordings? Another pause. Tighter. Cheryl blinked. Legal has advised, do you regret it? This time the question wasn't rhetorical. It was collective. Renee didn't speak for herself. She spoke for every intern who had ever flinched at Cheryl's praise, for every employee who had swallowed her jokes, for every woman who had been labeled difficult for demanding dignity. Maya watched as Cheryl's mouth opened, but still nothing came. And then, like a dam giving way, others stood, not yelling, not marching, just rising. Quiet resistance, visible refusal. And for the first time in her reign, Cheryl was outnumbered not by emails or data, but by bodies that refused to sit back down. Later that evening, Maya received a video clip from Lena, a wide shot of the auditorium as more than 40 employees stood in silence, while Cheryl stood frozen at the podium. No music, no chants, just standing. It said everything. Cheryl had led through intimidation. But now, standing in a room full of people who no longer feared her, she realized that silence could be louder than any protest chant, if it belonged to people who had nothing left to lose. Maya exhaled. She saved the clip to her drive, labeled it crack#1, and sat back, watching the news reports roll in. That night, Wexler Engineering quietly disabled public access to their staff directory. The next day, Cheryl's LinkedIn page was deactivated, and by Monday morning, every file Maya had ever submitted to the company portal, designs, patents, project notes, had been scrubbed. But she wasn't worried, because she had backups. She had witnesses. And most importantly, she had momentum. The first tremor had arrived, and the fault line beneath Wexler was only just beginning to split. That the following week began not with an announcement, but with a disappearance. Cheryl Whitman didn't show up to work on Monday. No emails, no press statement, no calendar activity. Her office door remained locked, blinds drawn, her nameplate conspicuously removed by facilities under vague remodeling orders. But everyone knew. The queen of structure and silence had vanished. Not fired, not resigned, but swallowed by the very walls she once controlled. HR said nothing. The board, now scrambling to secure remaining clients, issued a generic statement about internal leadership restructuring. But by then, it didn't matter. Wexler Engineering was no longer a firm. It was a cautionary tale. The media now referred to it as the blueprint case, a symbol of how institutional bias could be exposed, not by protests or lawsuits alone, but by one mother, one spreadsheet, one voice that refused to be erased. Maya sat in her new office at Technova Solutions, not with satisfaction, but with steel-edged clarity. The corner suite was modest but sunlit, the walls lined with design patents she had filed under her own name. Caleb's latest drawing, a tall building with arms wrapped around smaller ones, was taped beside her computer. He had labeled it Safe Tower. It was ironic, she thought. She had once dreamed of designing bridges. Now she was building foundations, cultural, structural, ethical ones that could outlast steel. That morning, her assistant forwarded an email marked confidential. Subject line, whistleblower coordination, federal inquiry. Inside, a short note. We've identified additional companies tied to the Wexler network. We believe Cheryl was part of a larger communication ring coordinating discriminatory practices in hiring and promotions across 5 firms. Your documentation is being used to draft subpoenas. Are you willing to testify? Maya stared at the screen, not in fear, in focus. Yes, she replied. I'll stand. By midweek, Ava Pearson held a press conference in front of the Senate Labor Subcommittee, introducing the Workplace Equity Enforcement Act, a legislative proposal designed to increase transparency in performance evaluation, termination review, and promotion tracking across all federal contractors. She ended her speech with a photo, Maya holding Caleb, standing outside Wexler the day she was fired. This bill exists because one woman refused to confuse professionalism with submission, Ava said, because she saw the cracks in the structure and dared to call them by name. The image spread across every social media platform within hours. Maya received messages from women in construction, tech, biotech, even entertainment. Stories poured in. Small stories, big stories, all echoing the same thread. They told me I was too soft, too distracted, too much of a mother. Thank you for showing me that my presence was never the problem. Their lens was. Meanwhile, Cheryl was spotted at a private airport lounge by a former intern who took a blurry photo and shared it anonymously with the caption, "She's trying to vanish before the subpoenas catch up." But Maya didn't care where Cheryl fled. She was no longer the story. The story was the system, the ripple effect, the recalibration of what leadership meant. That Friday, Lena organized a small dinner, just Maya, Terrence, Diana, and 2 other Silent Circuit members. They met at a quiet restaurant Maya used to walk by on her way to the train when she couldn't afford anything but black coffee and bus fare. Now, they sat together, not as victims, but as architects of change. "It's not over," Diana said, lifting her glass. "But we cracked the facade. We did more than that," Terrence added. "We changed the blueprints." Maya didn't speak for a moment. She looked at each of them. Witnesses, warriors, women who had learned to fight without shouting, to endure without giving in, to burn without turning to ash. Then she raised her glass too. "To the next generation," she said. "May they never have to explain why they brought their child to work." And somewhere, miles away from them, in a silent, sterile office emptied of power and pretense, a single plaque still hung crooked on the wall. It read, "Professionalism above all else." No one had the heart to take it down. But no one believed it anymore, because the foundation had split. And from that fracture, something real was finally rising. The subpoena came on a Monday, folded inside a thick government envelope and hand-delivered to Cheryl Whitman's gated residence in River North. It was stamped with the seal of the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The document wasn't angry. It didn't need to be. It was clinical, precise. A list of dates, statements, financial anomalies, and employee testimonies, all arranged with the elegance of someone who had been building their case for far longer than Cheryl had realized. The words "systemic pattern of exclusionary practice" were repeated 7 times. She didn't respond. Not to the letter, not to the silence outside her door, not even when her attorney told her the investigation now involved federal contracts, meaning the Department of Labor was watching too. Instead, she disappeared further, deleted all remaining social accounts, canceled her speaking engagement at the Women in Tech Summit, told her family it was just backlash from the internet. But Cheryl knew. Somewhere deep down, past the layers of self-preservation and manicured ego, she understood that the empire she built on microaggressions, veiled policies, and curated cruelty had finally turned on her. Her power didn't collapse with fire. It evaporated. Every missed call, every unanswered email, every invite that no longer arrived. In the span of 2 months, Cheryl went from being the most sought-after name in structural leadership to a cautionary footnote in HR training modules across the country. Maya, meanwhile, was standing on a different kind of platform. Literally, she had just stepped onto the TEDx stage in downtown Chicago. The crowd was intimate but electric. Engineers, activists, working mothers, young interns who had found her story in whispers passed around like a secret. Her talk was called "The Weight of Being Seen," and when she spoke, she didn't need to raise her voice. "I was invisible for 8 years, she began, not because I lacked value, but because I made the system uncomfortable by existing outside its mold. She told them about her first day at Wexler, about the time her colleagues said she was surprisingly technical, about being told to smile more, about having to prove her designs 3 times over, about the day she brought Caleb in, his tiny hand in hers, and was told she no longer belonged. She told them what it meant to watch people look away when you were being erased in real time. But she didn't end with pain, she ended with precision. When we speak of equity, we must stop waiting for collapse to force us into redesign. We must treat people the way we treat buildings, with proactive maintenance, with intention, with structural integrity. The room stood when she finished, not out of politeness, but because no one could remain seated after hearing a woman speak the truth with such terrifying calm. The video of her talk reached 1 million views within 5 days. Technova's board extended her role to include oversight on ethical AI implementation, her idea, and schools began requesting her as a guest lecturer, especially programs trying to rebuild after years of low female and minority retention in engineering fields. Then came the letter. It was handwritten, the envelope plain, no return address. Inside, a note. You probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to say this. You didn't just destroy me. You erased who I thought I was. I don't know who that makes you, but I can't sleep knowing you walk through fire like it's nothing. I hope your son never has to know what it's like to be me. C. Maya read it twice, then tucked it away. She didn't feel pity, because pity is reserved for those who suffer without choice. Cheryl had chosen, over and over again, to build a throne out of silence and to mistake fear for loyalty. Maya didn't hate her. She simply understood her better than Cheryl would ever be capable of understanding Maya, and that was enough. That weekend, Caleb handed her a new drawing. It was a picture of a bridge, but not the kind she used to design. This one had no support beams. Instead, it was made of people, tiny, hand-drawn figures linked arm to arm, standing across the span, holding each other up. "It's a people bridge," he said proudly. "Like you." Maya smiled, eyes burning, heart still and full. Because, yes, steel bends, systems fail, and even the strongest towers eventually fall. But bridges made of people, those are built to last. 6 months later, the offices of Wexler Engineering were empty. Not work from home quiet, vacant, gutted, dead. The reception desk had been stripped of its logo. The glass walls bore the ghost outlines of removed nameplates, and the only sound that echoed down the once proud halls was the hum of disconnected electricity. A for lease banner flapped weakly against the third-story window, graffiti now scrawled in permanent marker over the building's awning. "We see you now." Maya drove by it one morning on the way to Caleb's new school. She hadn't planned to look. But when the red light held her longer than expected, her eyes wandered toward the building that once held her dignity hostage. She didn't feel triumph, just clarity. The way you feel when you finally see the entire map after walking it blindfolded for years. Caleb leaned forward from the back seat. "That the place?" Maya didn't lie. It was. He was quiet for a moment, looked small. She smiled, shifting the car back into gear. It always was. Meanwhile, the silent circuit had grown beyond Maya's circle. It was no longer just a folder, a portal, or a whisper network. It had become a national archive. Terrence had helped build a secure platform now, accessed by employees from every major industry. Tech, healthcare, law, finance. Thousands of submissions came in every week. Redacted evaluations, recordings, memos, meeting logs, a legacy file of systemic silence, finally cataloged in the open. Journalists used it, policymakers cited it, companies feared it. And quietly, deeply, the culture began to shift. At Technova, where Maya now served as the chief integrity officer, new protocols were being adopted across every department. Exit interviews were now recorded, with employee consent, and analyzed for bias markers. Promotion justifications required anonymized metrics. DEI wasn't a quarterly slogan anymore. It was a tracked system, with transparency built in like rebar in concrete. One afternoon, Maya stood before a group of new hires, bright, brilliant young engineers, many of them first-generation college students. She scanned the room and saw herself in every seat, hopeful, hungry, and waiting to be told they belonged. So she told them. "This company does not ask you to leave your humanity at the door," she said. "We build things that last, and people are part of the structure. Without them, none of this stands." When the applause faded, a quiet hand went up in the back. "How did you know when to speak up?" the young woman asked. "Weren't you scared?" Maya paused, then answered, not like a leader giving advice, but like a survivor telling the truth. "I was scared every day, but there came a point where silence cost more than my fear. Speaking up wasn't brave, it was necessary maintenance. And once I saw the cracks, I couldn't unsee them." Later that night, as she packed up her office, a message came in, flagged by the system she'd helped design. It was anonymous, submitted through silent circuit, but she recognized the rhythm of the phrasing. "I used to think I was failing, that I was too soft, too slow, too emotional. Then I heard your story. I stopped apologizing for being human. Thank you for designing something better than steel. You gave us something to stand on." Maya closed her laptop slowly, heart quiet but awake. In her bag was Caleb's latest drawing, a city skyline this time. But in the corner of the paper, a woman stood tall, holding a blueprint above her head like a lantern. Across it, in shaky pencil-written letters, he'd written, "For the next builder." Because in the end, this wasn't about revenge. It was about legacy, about who got to write the design notes in the margins of history. And this time, it was Maya. The news didn't break with a bang, but with a whisper that roared louder than any headline. At precisely 8:13 a.m., the Department of Justice released a press statement. Cheryl Whitman and affiliates under federal investigation for coordinated discriminatory practices, wire fraud, and ethics violations tied to government contracts. By noon, her name trended not as an icon of industry, but as a warning label, a case study dissected in corporate boardrooms, HR conferences, and graduate ethics courses across the nation. Maya was in her office when the headline hit. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She just sipped her tea slowly as emails flooded in. Journalists asking for quotes, professors requesting permission to use her case in curriculum. 3 separate invitations to sit on federal workplace equity panels. But she ignored them, for now, because one message stood out among them all. It was from Diana. She tried applying for a role at a mid-sized firm in Milwaukee. Word got out before the second interview. They dropped her. She's been blackballed across 6 states. No one wants her anymore, not even the lobbyists. Even her alma mater revoked her alumni honors. She's unhireable, invisible, just like she made us. Maya stared at the message for a long time, not out of cruelty, but out of recognition. Cheryl had believed her power was permanent, that her titles, her whiteness, her connections would shield her forever. But what she hadn't realized was that power built on silence and suppression isn't real power. It's a borrowed crown, and eventually, someone collects the debt. That afternoon, Maya walked into Caleb's school early. He was in the art room, working on a class project, a giant collage titled Future Cities. There were robots, windmills, floating green parks, and in the middle, a single towering building made of cardboard and string, surrounded by stick figures of all shades holding hands. "That one's your building," he said proudly. "I told everyone my mom doesn't just build stuff, she makes sure it doesn't fall." Maya knelt beside him, her throat tightening. "You're my favorite engineer," she whispered. Back at Technova, her calendar was full. Keynote at the Global Equity Forum, meeting with the White House Labor Task Force, TED Global Invitation. But that night, as she tucked Caleb into bed, she didn't tell him about any of it. She just read him a bedtime story. Not about queens or dragons, but about a girl who was told she didn't belong, and how she built a home anyway, not just for herself, but for everyone else who'd been locked out. As he drifted off, Maya stepped outside to the balcony and looked out across the city. Somewhere out there, Cheryl sat alone in a house too quiet, too expensive, surrounded by plaques that now meant nothing. Her empire gone, her power revoked. Her voice no longer feared, only pitied. And Maya, she didn't gloat. She simply whispered into the wind, "You underestimated the wrong woman." Then she turned off the light, knowing that her story wasn't about the fall of a tyrant. It was about the rise of something real, the kind of leadership that doesn't need a title to be heard. Because now, every building in this city echoed with a new design, one Maya had drawn in silence, in pain, and finally, in power. 1 year after Cheryl Whitman's empire crumbled into headlines and hearings, Maya Thompson stood beneath the arched glass of the Smithsonian's newly opened Women in Innovation exhibit, staring at a framed photo she hadn't seen in months. A still from the day she had been fired, Caleb in her arms, the Wexler logo blurred behind them. The placard beside it read, "The moment that redefined leadership." Visitors walked slowly past her, reading her story. Whispers followed her, not of pity, but of awe. Young girls clutched notebooks. Educators pointed at the panel where Maya's silent protest, walking out with dignity, was described as the catalyst for the most significant corporate policy shift on gender equity in the past decade. But for Maya, it wasn't about the museum or the attention. It was about what came next. That morning, just before the opening, she had received confirmation from the Department of Education. Her proposal to integrate structural bias training into all federally funded engineering programs had passed. A pilot program named the Thompson Framework would begin rolling out in 12 states by the fall. She didn't tell anyone. She just stood quietly, watching 2 black teenage girls stare at the exhibit like it was a mirror they hadn't known they needed. "This is her?" one whispered. "Yeah," the other replied. "She's the one who brought it all down." Maya almost smiled, but she corrected the thought in her head. No, I didn't bring anything down. I just refused to let it keep standing. Later that evening, back in her office at Technova, she reviewed the final report from the federal commission she had co-chaired. Over 170 corporate executives removed, 5 class action lawsuits settled, 3 major companies completely restructured, and 1 national anti-discrimination statute now signed into law. Her phone buzzed, a video call from Ava Pearson. "Turn on the news," Ava said, barely hiding her grin. Maya clicked the remote. A white banner ran across the screen. Breaking, Cheryl Whitman, sentenced in federal court, 5 years probation, lifetime industry ban, financial restitution, ordered to 42 former employees. Maya didn't react at first. Just watched the footage of Cheryl walking out of the courthouse in a beige suit, sunglasses hiding her expression, her once proud stride now replaced by mechanical steps. A voiceover read excerpts from the judge's statement. Leadership is not built on fear, it is built on responsibility. Miss Whitman failed not only her employees, but the institutions that trusted her. This court recognizes the broader impact of her actions, and the woman whose courage illuminated them. Maya closed the laptop, a moment of stillness. Then she walked to the large whiteboard in her office, wiped away the flowchart titled Crisis Response, Phase 5, and drew one simple sentence in bold marker. What we build next must be stronger than what we survived. That weekend, she and Caleb visited a newly renovated public library. It had been one of the first institutions to adopt her equity architecture model, a redesign of access points, signage, lighting, and layout, all made with inclusion at the core. Caleb ran through the children's section, now lined with tactile maps and calm zones for neurodivergent kids. He sat in a reading nook and looked up at her. "Do you think I can build something one day too?" he asked. Maya knelt down. "You already are," she said. "Every time you speak or draw or listen, you're building the world you want to live in." He beamed. "Like you?" She paused, then smiled. "No, better." That night, Maya returned home and opened a fresh document on her laptop. New project, The Invisible Architect. A book, a blueprint, dolbied, a guide. Not about engineering steel or stone, but dignity. She wrote the first line without hesitation. This is not a story about being fired. This is a story about being found. Not by others, but by yourself. Standing alone in a room where no one clapped, no one spoke, and yet you realized you still had a voice. And that was enough to tear down a tower. And somewhere, in a quiet apartment far from the noise of courtrooms and cameras, Cheryl Whitman scrolled through job listings under an alias. But every door stayed shut. Every reputation she once leveraged had turned to dust. Because while Maya had been erased in silence, Cheryl had been undone by her own echo. And Maya, she was no longer part of the system. She was the woman who rewrote it, blueprint by blueprint, story by story, until no one would ever have to start from scratch again. Maya Thompson was never trying to be a hero. She was just trying to survive, with her name, her son, and her dignity intact. But when the system tried to erase her, she didn't crumble. She documented, she connected, she exposed. And in doing so, she didn't just bring down a corrupt executive. She sparked a movement, rewrote the rules, and built a future where silence was no longer standard, and justice had an architect. Cheryl Whitman thought she was untouchable. But what she forgot is that the higher the tower, the harder the fall, especially when it's built on the backs of those it silences. Maya didn't just fight back. She redesigned the battlefield. So the next time someone tells you that being a mother, being emotional, being too different makes you less professional, remember her name. Because the best revenge is not revenge at all. It's rewriting the blueprint. And Maya, she made sure none of us would ever have to start from zero again. This is not just a story. This is a warning, and it's a promise. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you pause, share it. Because somewhere out there, another Maya is still being erased, and she deserves to know she's not alone anymore.